Hello, guys, and welcome back to our position breakdowns. And today we're doing defensive ends. We just did our quarterback ranking, and you should check it out and see what Draft Day's opinion on the quarterbacks he has listed there. Now we're breaking down on our second thing, which is defensive ends, which is, according to you, Draft Day, the second most important position.
Mhm.
And there we go. And so,
Hey, you gotta hit those quarterbacks. You gotta find guys who are gonna disrupt the pocket.
right, you got to find somebody to smack that
You
franchise
gotta
court.
find the quarterback first. You gotta find the quarterback first, and then you gotta find someone who's gonna hit the opponent's quarterback.
Right. You want your quarterback to be better than the other quarterback, so you can have a defensive end to smack the franchise guy off, the other guys off. So now let's get to it. Who is the number one defensive end you have?
I don't think anybody would be surprised here. I'm pretty much with the consensus. I do have Jadeveon Clowney as a top defensive end. 6'6", 266 pounds. He's long. He's athletic. He's freakish. This year he wasn't as productive as he was the year before, as probably most people know. I think it had to do more so to the fact that he didn't have that he had a little bit more of his foot in the NFL door. Like we've had this discussion a few times that he did have his foot on the NFL door, and he wasn't like really worried about about South Carolina as much as he was looking forward to making his investment in the NFL. Not
Right.
that he didn't want South Carolina to win or he wasn't trying hard, but at the same time, his heart was really in the NFL.
Right. And me and you already said about our previous podcast about the mock draft about how he literally could have been redshirted this year, really did not even play, and he would have been still the first overall consensus pick, you know. And he just wanted to still put some tape. He still wanted to play for his team. And
Mm-hmm.
both me and you also discussed about he didn't want to get injured, and he just saw big
Look at
time.
Marcus Lattimore. I always say that's the first person he probably should have looked over. He saw his friend Marcus Lattimore up there, who helped bring him into South Carolina in
and
his recruiting.
and we saw
He
one of the
looked over
most
at his friend, and he's looking at his friend. Whoa, man, my friend it could have probably been a first or second rounder, and now he's sitting there fifth round by the San Francisco 49ers.
exactly, and still recovering from his injury. He's still yet to play a down in the NFL, and that could have been a career-ending injury. And thank the Lord for our technology we have of today that he is still allowed to play. Because if he would have got hurt in the early '90s, late '80s, or even before then, he would have not played NFL again. He would have been.
Played another down of football.
But other than that, let's get to it. Why is Javion Clowney ranked this high? What makes him the number one overall pick? Why are we so intrigued about him?
First, he has a rare blend of size and speed. He's like lived up to the hype that he had coming out of high school. He's done everything that we expected him to do. A LeBron James ish, Adrian Peterson like kind of career at times. You know, those guys just dominated. He's like a freakish and the thing that people don't understand, like the most important thing a pass rusher must be able to do, as far as a pass rusher, the first move you have to be able to do is a bull rush. And in order to do a bull rush, is you have to have an ability to transfer speed into power. And when I'm talking about speed into power, it's that first step in getting into a guy's chest. He can do that. Now, is all his moves in there and everything? No, he needs to get better as far as like doing that on a consistent basis and keeping his pad level high and everything. But I also think that like if you teach him more pass rushing moves and he doesn't just rely on that one move that he goes, either he's going to bull rush you or he's going to fake to the outside or go in and then go inside of you. That's his favorite move. If you take that away from Jadeveon Clowney right now, he hasn't been able to find a counter move to that. But
I'm pretty sure people are gonna, add, as they say, add more
yeah,
weapons to his speed
more
rush.
weapons to him because Mario Williams coming out, all he had was pretty much a bull rush. He was even worse than Jadeveon Clowney. Go
Right.
look at Mario Williams' tape as a sophomore and as a junior. He was productive, but at the same time, he virtually had like virtually no moves. And in the NFL, they kind of figured him out early on in his career that he really doesn't have moves. And then they started teaching him how to use his hands, where to put his body. If you get with the right defensive line coach, I think that Jadeveon Clowney could fit into it. Some people have told me that the Texans shouldn't take Jadeveon Clowney because not a 3-4 outside linebacker. Well, how many times does a 3-4 outside linebacker really drop out? So Jadeveon Clowney, he's gonna maybe drop back maybe 5% of the time.
And me and you already talked about this in the podcast before, but the best comparison if he does come to Houston would be comparing him to, as in the 49ers, as J.J. Watt will be the
Aldon Smith.
Yes. Will be the Alex no, not Alex Smith, will be the Justin Smith, except 10 times better, and we would have, and then Jadeveon Clowney would be the Aldon Smith, and Aldon Smith, we all know, played defensive end in college, and
those things could be taught.
Exactly.
And ultimately, the guy who we really reminded me of, like I was going through comparisons. I thought of Javon Curse. I went Julius Peppers, Mario Williams. I've seen all of the comparisons that everybody came up with. The guy I kind of compare him, that I'm not saying that he's this player or anything, but like he has similar traits to him coming out of like in college, and the way I saw him in the NFL, it was Simeon Rice. Like he's almost a forgotten guy now because of his later part of his career with the Broncos and the Colts. It was kind of awful, but when he was with the Cardinals and the Bucks, Simeon Rice was an elite pass rusher. I think he racked over 100 sacks in his career.
Right, so, and him when he was with the Bucks was
guys in the NFL that have over 100 sacks. There's mostly just Hall of Famers.
Right, and yeah, I think Jadeveon Clowney is a top-notch blue chip guy, and like you said, only him and Sammy Watkins are the only two, I believe, still right, are the two elite players in this draft. To you,
I added one more after finishing all my tape and doing all my research and everything. I added up one more.
All right,
and that was Khalil Mack.
Right, and that's also good. Another blue chip
so
guy.
There's only 3 guys, so there's still not a whole bunch of guys just walking around with Jadeveon Clowney type of talent.
Right, and so now let's go to the second. Let's go to what do you think his position? Like, what positions do you think he can play, Jadeveon Clowney?
I think he could play anything outside true pass rusher. If you wanted him to play the wide 9 position, he could easily play that. I think that would be his perfect, like the wide 9, what Detroit did last year, or what Philadelphia, like where they have the ends very far away from the defensive tackles. Like they're almost at where the tight ends are normally at in the offense.
Right.
I think that he would benefit almost perfect in that scenario because the wide 9 just features you truly to be a true pass rusher and to be able to jump up the field. If you can hold your own and at the rundown, I'm not talking about making tackles for losses or penetrating the backfield. Just hold up the offensive lineman. You're fine. You're fine as a run blocker. Trent Cole succeeded in that off the defense.
And so did Jason Babin, right? That's when they both.
Jason Babin succeeded in that defense, but Jason Babin at times, the thing that Jason Babin got sacks in that defense, but the problem with Jason Babin, he couldn't hold on to like the blocks in the run game.
Right, and so
they don't ask you to make tackle for losses in the run game. They just ask you to hold your block. Hold that guy up at least until another defensive lineman or another defensive player can come up and fill that gap and make that tackle.
Right, and so yeah,
but an ideal. That's my ideal pick. But I think he could play pretty much any scenario as an edge guy, as long as he's an outside linebacker in a 3-4 or a true 4-3 defensive end.
Right. And so now let's get to the second defensive end you have ranked on here, and who is that?
I have Coney Ealy, the defensive end out of Missouri. There's all concerns about his. There was always concerns about how does he move? How flexible is he? Does he have bad hips? Can he turn directions and all of this type of things? And is he just limited to only being a defensive end in a 4-3? Seeing him and going back and seeing all the things that how he tested out and from all the reports that how he is, he can play outside linebacker in the 3-4 if you needed him to be. And I thought he was only limited, like when I even wrote my report on it, I thought he was limited to only playing one position in one scheme. Now I'm seeing a little bit that he could actually move around. He's not as fast, he's not as quick, but I do think that he can stand up and play outside linebacker. but he best still be suited to play as a defensive end. He has prototypical size. He has lateral quickness. He has everything that you look for. He has those long arms. He's knocked down some passes. He knows how to play in space somewhat.
Right.
But as far as the biggest thing for him, I think that his problem is right now is he still doesn't have a really grasp for the game, and that kind of still scares me a little bit from Kony Ealy. Like, he gets lost a lot of times.
Right, yeah. And then, so what do you think is what position do you think he's best suited at, and what positions can he play?
I think he can play the 3-4 outside linebacker, 4-3. He's not really a speed rusher because if you look at his time at the combine, I'm going to go based on his combine. I don't really have the pro day right in front of me right now. It's a 4.92. 4.92 says you're probably not a speed rusher. At 6'4", 273 pounds, you're probably not a speed rusher. So it'd be best that he be there, but I do think that he has the potential to play outside linebacker. But his best position would probably be a true 4-3 defensive end.
Right. And so now, keep going.
Yeah, I wanted to also bring up maybe a comparison to somebody that he could also look.
Oh yeah, that would be wonderful. Yeah, the comparison.
If you remember Alawande Ogunbiyi, the Dolphins defensive end.
Right. Yeah, that was
for the Bears and eventually for the Texans. He's very similar to that guy. That's the guy I kind of drew comparisons to. That's the guy who came like right on the top of my head.
Right.
As soon as I started watching him.
And so now let's get to the number 3 prospect. Who is your number 3 defensive end?
This guy played outside linebacker in college, but I think he'd make an even better defensive end. I moved Trent Murphy from outside linebacker rankings to my defensive end rankings. And he's my number 3 guy. He has 34-inch arms, which are pretty long, decent quickness. And the thing I liked about Trent Murphy the most was the fact that he just didn't just shed block. Like, at Stanford and at San Francisco, like, I don't know whether it's Jim Harbaugh's disciples as far as 3-4 or whatever, they don't teach them just like, okay, let's shed the block. They say destroy the block. Like, go inside the guy's pads and blow it up. Like, the quarterback's going to come in there. The clock is going to collapse on him, or the running backs is going to come in there, and there's going to be, like, no run lanes. That's why year in and year out, Oregon is stuffing the run. Stanford is stuffing the run against anybody, and the same with the 49ers. He was taught to do that. If he can bring that to an NFL team, it would be really lovely as well, too. And he's rarely out of position. That's also a thing I really like about him. He's a high motor guy. Like, against Zach Martin, everybody bashes him about how Zach Martin dominated him in the Senior Bowl and how he dominated him in the regular season this year. Against Zach Martin, he never gave up on any of those plays. Like, when he was beaten and he knew he wasn't going to get to the quarterback, he just still put on the effort, and you could see the effort, and he would fight all the way to the end. And that's I just love watching Trent Murphy. But at the same time, he is limited as an athlete. He struggles versus like the open area. He's not the guy that you're going to be like, well, this is all world, and his upside is like really limited compared to the Jadeveon Clowney and Kony Ealy, the guys in front of him.
Right, and who do you think? What do you think his best positions are?
His best position is probably just defensive end, but I do think that he can play outside linebacker. He already showed that he can somewhat play outside linebacker. Just don't drop him back off too often. And he has an ability to play a pass a little bit more so than those other guys because he's actually done it in games. He's played 3-4 outside linebacker, unlike the guys in front of him.
Right, yeah. And so what do you think do you have a comparison for him? How did you compare?
Yeah, I drew a comparison to him. I had Chris Easley, the old Bills, Chris Kelsey, the defensive end from the Buffalo Bills. He came out of Nebraska. He plays rarely similar to him.
Right, yeah. And a good stat for him, Trent Murphy did lead the NCAA in sacks this past year at 15 sacks. And I have watched him a lot, and he does have a high motor of not giving up a lot. He is also I think he's also a good run stopper at times. And like you said about Stanford, he doesn't just do one move. He's a dude. I think he has a lot more moves than some of these prospects in this
He's
draft.
more advanced than Jadeveon Clowney or
Ely, Coney Ely. Yeah, I think he has a lot more. He has a bull rush. He has and like you said, he does destroy the offensive line, and I've seen it before. And so now let's get to it. What is your number 4 defensive end in this draft?
My number 4 guy is Stephon Tuitt, a guy who I was really fighting for. Like in the preseason, I had him as rated as an interior lineman, but I moved him back out to defensive end because I was thinking to myself, can he really play defensive tackle? Because defensive tackles, you have to have a sense of it. The defensive tackles that fail in the NFL are the guys who lack intensity. Stephon Tuitt at times doesn't have the intensity to play a defensive tackle position because you're right in the middle. You can play the 5 technique, but like a defensive tackle, if you put him in a 4-3, he would be limited to being virtually nothing.
Right.
I think that more of him that he could probably play more so as a 5 technique on a 3-4 defensive end, and he's kind of limited in his role, and that's why he's really there. But he has a ton of upside. You saw it right there. 2012, he looked like an elite player. He looked like everybody was like, well, he's a bona fide first rounder. But like now, I don't think of him as a first rounder at all. He's a good size for a pass rusher, but
at times
he lacks speed. He lacks speed and he lacks intensity to do that. At times he is lazy. And really when he really got exposed this year, like before, beginning of the year he was a little out of shape coming back from surgery. I gave him the pass. When he was healthy and he was going during the middle of the season, he was relatively good. The latter portion of the season, when Louis Nix got hurt, Stephon Tuitt Louis Nix got hurt. Stephon Tuitt's production and play just went and shrunk.
Right, and when he needed to step up, he just did not step up for the defensive line.
This year, a lot of times because Louis Nix freed him up. Like that's why I like Louis Nix so much. Like he freed up like a lot of those Notre Dame guys to make all these big plays, even though he's not pulling up the stats.
Right. Yeah.
Stephon Tuitt benefited from him somewhat, but at the same time, I still think he has a way high upside, and you can get something out of him. Maybe you can take him in the first round, like really late, but I wouldn't take him anywhere but beyond in the top 25. I think top 25 is pretty much out of the picture for him.
Right. Yeah. And so, what do you think? You already said his best position would be on a 3-4 defensive end.
Yeah, which is the 5 technique.
Right, 5 technique. So, do you have any comparisons for him?
I had Sean Ellis, who played for the Titans, Jets, and Patriots.
Right.
Tennessee. He played. He was at defensive end at Tennessee, not Titans. Tennessee. Yeah. He was a defensive end at Tennessee. Played for the Jets and the Patriots.
Right. Yeah. And so now let's get on to the number 5 defensive end you have in your rankings.
I have an undersized guy who could play 3-4 outside linebacker. He could play defensive end. He really looked really impressive, and I really kind of fell in love with him at the Senior Bowl. I already liked him already all throughout the season. Like I was telling everybody, Chris Smith, defensive end out of Arkansas, but I started really liking him even more at the Senior Bowl. I moved him up all the way to my 5th defensive end, and I think that he has a ton of upside and a ton of potential, more so than people give him credit for. The thing that he might be a little bit hated on, for a guy his height, he has pretty long arms. He's 34 inches and 1/8 arms. That's pretty long arms for a guy who's 6'1", 260 pounds. He's a little bit undersized, shorter demeanor. I'm not going to say undersized. He's a little bit shorter. He's the same size same weight as Jadeveon Clowney, but has a little bit shorter demeanor, and his stature is not as tall, and he can't reach up and bat over the balls like all those other guys. Outside of those type of things, Chris Smith really spells an NFL starter for me for the next probably 6 or 7 years. And if you can get that out of a guy who's going to get you 7-8 sacks, he's worth that second-round pick, and that's where I graded him out.
Right, and I like him too out of Arkansas. He was a really good player for them, and at the Senior Bowl, yeah, it helped his draft stock a lot. So now we get into that section. It's 6 through 10, and do you have any what's your rankings 6 through 10, and name some players you really like that could step up into your top 5 rankings.
I'm pretty much done mostly with them, but number 6, I had Jackson Jeffcoat, who I thought would come in as a sophomore at Texas. I thought he would be. There's no way that he's not going to be a first round pick, and now I feel him maybe as a second round pick. Some guys are projecting him as a third round pick. I have Dominique Easley, number 7. I moved Adrian Hubbard, the defensive end outside linebacker from Alabama, to defensive end in my ranking. I have Adrian Hubbard at number 8, Scott Crichton, the Oregon State defensive end, and Kareem Martin, the North Carolina defensive end, at number 10.
Right. And so which one of these do you like that sticks out the most in this group? Are these guys relatively close to get together within talent, or?
Yeah, I'll say about 6 to 9 were actually closer together in talent. Like as far as like Jackson Jeffcoat, Dominique Easley, Adrian Hubbard, and Scott Crichton, they were all really close. But then there was a little bit. Then there was a little bit of a drop off. Like Jackson Jeffcoat and Dominique Easley scored the same grade for me. Like they're relatively really close. I had a hard time. Like Dominique Easley would have easily probably been, no pun intended.
Right.
Dominique Easley would have easily probably been the number 3 defensive player, my number 2 defensive end. He would have easily been my number 2 defensive end had he stayed healthy.
Right.
But I know what everybody's gonna say. Like, well, he's not gonna be able to be ready maybe in training camp. Blah blah blah. This and that. I'm not worried about Dominique Easley playing right after training camp. He's not dead. He's still alive. I was like, I'm not going to take him off my list just because he got injured this year and it was a really big injury or whatever. He's not dead. He's still alive. He's probably going to play football, and he's probably going to be a really good football player. And Dominique Easley is the one that I was like, if it wasn't for the injury, he would probably be my top 50 players. He would have made this class that much stronger. But Dominique Easley being hurt, having durability, and then being a tweener, it didn't help him. Like, I thought he could have maybe, like, been a good athlete, but at the same time, 6'2", 288 pounds, what are you, a defensive tackle or are you a defensive end? One year he was playing defensive tackle. One year he was playing the 5 technique. The other year they were playing him as a true defensive end in a 4-3, and I'm like, he never really had a role.
Right. And
Dominique Easley would have been my number 2 guy.
Yeah, and he was coming out of high school really highly touted. He was
him and Sharif Floyd.
Right, him and Sharif Floyd came out highly touted, and at Florida, he was in running behind Jadeveon Clowney as one of the top defensive linemen in the SEC. And next, he was having a pretty productive year. Florida wasn't having a good year.
Yeah, he was having a pretty good year all the way until I think the Miami games when he got hurt in week 3, and it was a really big time injury, and his stock has been plummeting. But I'm not going to plummet to where I'm going to crash him. When I think a first round guy, if you can get him in the middle of the second round, I think that if I had a mock draft him or something, he's probably going to end up in the 3rd round because of his injury. But at the same time, he's middle of the 2nd round, I think that's value. 3rd round, that's just a steal.
Yeah, I think that would be, if he goes late 2nd round, that's what I think he'll probably, between the middle of the 2nd to late 2nd, if somebody gets him there, I think that's where his talent and what you see so far, that would be his highest pick, where he would be drafted. But if he gets picked late 3rd round, or even in third,
you're getting a steal, and that just speaks on the depth of this draft. Like, there's guys like Jackson Jeffcoat, who could be a 7, 8, 9, 10 set guy for you, a Scott Crichton, and even a Kareem Martin. He was more productive than Quentin Coples was his senior year.
Right,
correct. Quentin Coples went in the 1st round. Like, this draft is so deep. Like, I don't understand how people do not see this. Like, if I was a team, I would be doing everything I could possibly do, be trading down and getting as much multiple draft picks. I love this draft as far as its depth is concerned.
Right. And so now we go into 10 through, I don't know what your last number on defensive ends is, but let's say 10 to the end of the road. Who do you have?
It goes all the way to 24, so it's pretty long.
All right, so let's give me players.
Let's just keep it to
10 through 15. Let's do 10 through 15.
15. Okay, that makes sense. At 10, I had Kareem Martin, the defensive end out of
Yeah.
North Carolina. 11, this is a guy who I've really followed for the last 2 years, and I've kind of been intrigued by his journey. And he's a real raw prospect. Larry Webster, the defensive end out of Bloomsburg. Number 12, I have Michael Sam, the defensive end out of Missouri. Number 13 on my list is Ethan Westbrook, the defensive end out of Western Texas A&M. Ed Stinson at 14, the defensive end coming out of Alabama, and Aaron Lynch, the defensive end out of South Florida via Notre Dame.
Yeah. And you have some small school prospects in here. And do you think they're going to do really well in the NFL?
Larry Webster, he's a raw project more so than Ethan Westbrook, who is I'll just simply put it to you like this. He has SEC talent, but he doesn't have SEC effort.
Right. I get what you mean by that.
He's always been that kind of guy. Like, I always seen SEC like, bro, this guy probably could play at Texas A&M, not West Texas A&M. You know, this guy has SEC talent, but he doesn't play that way. Larry Webster, he's a basketball player who's converting into a football player, and he just came out the blue. He tried out for the basketball team, for the football team, coming out from the basketball team. His scholarship was to Bloomsburg, was to basketball. At 6'6", his daddy was a football player. His dad told him, well, why don't you try out for the football team? You might have success there. And he tried out for the football team, and he was really, really good at defensive end. And then they tried him out at times at tight end, and he couldn't be stopped either at tight end either. So there's certain chances, like this guy's probably going to fall because of his rawness. And I'm going to say this to everybody. Small school prospects are not treated the same way as these big-time guys from the ACC and the small school guys that come from like Bloomsburg or whatever. They're not going to be treated the same way as an SEC raw prospect. If Larry Webster maybe played at North Carolina, he might have not been be treated the same way as he is at Bloomsburg, because at North Carolina being a raw prospect, everybody's like, well, he played against good competition. I have more exposure to him. They start to look and pick at the littlest and smallest things at you. Larry Webster running a 4.58, 6'6", 252 pounds. He's a pretty doggone good athlete, and you know that. He could play tight end. Worst case scenario, you can move him to tight end. He played it at college. He played both sides of the ball, so that tells you his versatility. That's why I rated him at number 11. He's that molded clay that you can build up in 5 or 6 years down the line. We're saying, well, this is the same thing we saw in Julian Thomas, the Jimmy Graham, guys who transferred from basketball to football.
Right.
Larry Webster could be that guy.
Yeah. And so now also we go into Aaron Lynch, a transfer from Notre Dame who got sat out the year before. He was a pretty good freshman. Everybody was raving about him and Stephon Tuitt when they were true freshmen there. And now he's at South Florida, and he had a kind of productive year. He had 29 tackles and 11.5 tackles and only 5 sacks, though, coming back from his true freshman year where he only had 5.5 sacks. And what do you think about him? Do you think a team that can get him in, what rounds do you think he'll go into?
I have him currently listed. He's a 121, so that is a 4th-round pick.
4th-round pick, and I probably think teams would probably pick him up in the 5th.
4th or 5th-round pick. He's more closer to late for a 4th round. I don't really. The thing about Aaron Lynch is the simple fact is I don't think that he should have came out. He was already a year removed from football the year before because he had to sit out due to NCAA rules. The next year you come out at South Florida, you lose a ton of weight. You come in there and you're saying you're going to be a pass rusher, a speed rusher, and that's how I'm going to make it because he was a lot bigger. I thought
he dropped 30 pounds, I believe. He dropped 30 pounds.
He dropped 30 pounds. I thought like maybe you can get a J.J. Watt type, out of him, but he dropped some weight. He was like, okay, I'm going to be a pass rusher, a speed rusher, and that really wasn't his game. He wasn't able to transfer power to speed. There was always little flaws in him, even going back and looking at his Notre Dame tape, but at the same time, flaws are usually erased over time. he hasn't gotten that time. I think that he should have probably stayed another year at South Florida. I thought it was a big mistake for him to come out, despite the whole South Florida not winning. Okay, then use it as a pedestal to make it to the NFL. It's okay sometimes to be selfish if you're on a really bad team sometimes, because you got to make that play. You got to try to make your own money, because these coaches are making money off of your name. Why don't you try to make money off of his?
Exactly. And do you have, now let's go into your 15 through 24. Do you have any prospects there that you like that are intriguing to you?
Curtis Marsh out of UCLA. I might actually, I kind of wanted to change his ranking, but I'm not, because I feel the way I feel about him because I've watched him enough on tape. But the thing I realized about Curtis Marsh, he was misused at UCLA, terribly misused. Like, when I broke down the tape, like, Curtis Marsh was disruptive, but at the same time, he didn't belong at the 5 technique. He did not belong at the 5 technique. He was 6'4", 252 pounds, and you have to hold up blocks and free up lanes and pass rush for Anthony Barr and those type of guys. He was played in the interior. There was no one person I thought this year. I think I even tweeted it out. Like, Curtis Marsh was the most misused player on defense last year total. Period. Like, I think if somebody actually brings him back and uses him how he was recruited to be playing as a true defensive end, instead of trying to play him as a 5 technique or a 3-4 defensive end, I think Curtis Marsh could actually become a pass rusher down the line that we say, wow, how did he fall down? How did he fall so low? How did he fall to the 6th round? Because that's where I have him rated at.
Right. And then I'm going to give you some 2 prospects that I've kind of watched and seen and liked. I'm going to give you Trevor Riley from Utah. Do you see him as a true defensive end or a...
I see him as an outside linebacker.
More
a little bit older. Trevor Riley on tape is really, really good, and he's really advanced, but there's no more growing of his skills as far as development in his body physically. The only thing that he's going to get better in the NFL, his only upside is his football IQ. That's the only thing he could possibly improve. And is that enough to draft him in the first 3 rounds, already being 25 years old, having some flaws, but those flaws are just mostly mental, and a little bit of more of some there are some physical limitations about him. So Trevor Riley, but he fits in my outside linebacker mold. I actually moved him over to outside linebacker.
And also another maybe tweener, James Gale from Virginia Tech.
Oh yeah, I also keep listing outside linebacker.
All right.
For me.
My
He's
bad.
also an outside linebacker for me as well too.
All right, no, I was just wanting to ask you about them and see what were your thoughts on them. But so, who do you have now? Let's go to like a general question about the defensive ends. Now, who is your what is your overall best prospect is Jadeveon Clowney, but who besides Jadeveon Clowney, who has the highest ceiling? Who can be
the highest ceiling? If he can stay healthy, if he can shows what he did this year, I actually think Jackson Jeffcoat could be just almost as good as he could be a Pro Bowl level every single year. All Jackson Jeffcoat, I felt coming out of high school that he was going to be. There's no way this guy doesn't go in the first round.
Right, and
at one point I had him. Like, I remember a few mock drafts, I had him as like a top 5 pick when he was his true junior year before he got hurt. I think he got hurt and ended up redshirting.
Right. And now let's go to who is a big time gem for you. If he goes on a team that developed him well, what do you think a late prospect within, let's say, 4th round and lower, who do you think could be a good gem?
I think this guy, I listed originally Josh Morrow, but I also like another guy who I would also name as my sleeper. I like Will Clark, the defensive end out of West Virginia.
Yeah, and he
was 6'6", 271 pounds, and if you really wanted it, and he really ran a pretty good time considering his size at 4.77. He had I think a 1.68 split, which was really, really good. His pro day, I heard pretty good raves around too. He's a long, athletic guy who I think that down the line you could either mold if you wanted to. If you got into an NFL weight room, just they have better weight rooms and strength and conditioning coaches. Will Clark could play the 5 technique. If you need him to play just a true defensive end, you can have him lose 10 pounds because he's right around the fringe of where he could be a defensive end in a 3-4 or a defensive end in a 4-3.
Right, he's right there.
Right in the fringe at 271 pounds at 6'6" in his body frame and how it looks. He can go either way, and if you wanted him to play one or the other, you can do that with him. And his versatility, he would be able to be that rotational guy, that guy, not necessarily your frontline starter, but like the guy who you can put like anytime like one of your defensive linemen is not there in the starting lineup or is tired or fatigued, because you're going to use most likely more than 4 linemen. He's going to be able to switch over and rotate in as a defensive lineman.
Right. And so that is our defensive end rankings right there. That was our breakdown on this year's defensive end ranking. And you heard it here. His sleeper pick was right there, Will Clark. His highest ceiling, if you develop him right, was Jackson Jeffcoat. But don't sleep on the defensive end from Florida just because he got hurt, injuries, Mr. Easley. And Jadeveon Clowney is the outright best player. And is he your best player right now in your?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
He's my number 1 player. And he's been my number 1 player since pretty much last April when I first got breaking down this year's class.
Right, and so that was his draft day's analysis on the defensive end rankings. And join us next time where we will be breaking down, I believe, the tackle positions. Are you doing left tackles, right tackles, or?
Well, I'm doing both. Because some of the guys play both, and in today's games, there's a little bit less value on offensive tackles, which side they could play. So yeah.
Right. And so we're breaking down each position of importance according to draft day. And join us next time where he will break down all the tackles in this year's draft. Who is a sleeper? Who has the highest ceiling? And good NFL comparisons to these players. And also maybe some players you may want to watch out for. And so join us next time. Remember to like and subscribe to Draft Day 101. Follow him on Twitter. Very informational. Very great guy also. And so there you go. Join us next time where we break down the offensive tackles.